Story 1. The landing gear of the propeller plane jolted as it made contact with the snow-crusted tundra. Despite the pilot's best efforts, the small aircraft fishtailed wildly across the uneven ground before skidding to an abrupt halt. John Michaels looked out the window into a whiteout. Heavy snow whipped sideways, obscuring even the plane's wing from view. A creaking groan tore his attention back inside as the hull twisted under accumulating drifts. "Everyone all right back there?" the pilot called over the intercom, breathless. John unbuckled his seatbelt and swiveled in the cramped space. Behind him, 5 other passengers stirred, nursing cuts and bruises from the rough touchdown. A woman near the tail stood shakily, blood smeared down one arm where a loose bag had struck. "Rachel, are you okay?" John asked gently. She nodded, eyes glassy with shock but determined. "I'll be fine. Check the others." The boy in the adjacent seat sobbed quietly as his mother tenderly examined his leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. John's assessment confirmed a broken tibia. The sharp bone end threatened to tear through skin at any moment without stabilization. A middle-aged man across the aisle groaned and held his side, breath shallow. His face had lost all color. Internal bleeding, John guessed grimly. Without a hospital's resources, the man's chances looked poor out here. At the front, a gaunt, bearded figure in a trench coat leaned heavily on the pilot's chair, steadying himself. Despite his haggard appearance, sharp eyes studied each passenger critically from beneath a battered pilot's cap. "That was too damn close," the pilot muttered, pulling off his headset with shaking hands. He blew into them to warm, numb fingers. "Radio's dead, of course. Engines are frozen solid. We're going nowhere until this blizzard lets up." A weak voice spoke from the back. "Mike ... IT hurts." The bearded man straightened, wincing, and examined the injured passenger. After a brief palpation of his midsection, the man Mike looked to John and Rachel. "He's bleeding internally but stable for now. Help me carry him out gently." Working together, the 4 transferred the moaning man onto an improvised stretcher of coats before braving the tempest outside. Snow plastered their clothes instantly. Within steps, the plane had vanished behind a wall of white. Squinting against stinging flakes, John made out the faded lights of a small settlement blinking in the distance, perhaps a mile away if the blowing snow didn't disorient them first. Shelter and survival supplies had to be their priority now. Rachel pointed to a squat building standing dark and alone nearer the landing strip. They staggered toward it through deepening drifts, the stretcher bearers switch off. John let his education take over, recalling historical tales of frontier medics like Michael O'Hara operating under harsh Alaskan conditions a century prior. In the refuge of that rocky foundation, 2 more passengers awaited help: the boy with his broken leg, ashen mother cradling him, and the bleeding man now semi-conscious. Outside, the storm's fury climbed to a deafening crescendo. But within, a flickering oil lamp's soft glow lent a glimmer of control to the chaos. Focusing on practical tasks helped still John's mind, as it always did in times of stress. Boards were broken from the ceiling to splint fractures. Precious antibiotics were located in an abandoned first aid kit. Alcohol, though weak, sterilized wounds. Hours passed before the immediate medical ordeals had been weathered, leaving 4 critically injured but stable under Mike's guidance. Exhausted, John sat heavily beside Rachel as she tended the last wound. Beyond flickering shadows, the blizzard continued unabated. How long until rescue could reach them? He sighed. "We may be here a while. Come daylight, we'll need to reinforce shelter, establish patrols in case." A scream abruptly shattered the tense calm, muffled outside yet drawing nearer. Rachel grabbed John's arm, eyes wide. Through the howling maelstrom, a shadowy figure staggered into view before collapsing face down into the snow. The howling winds had subsided during the long Alaskan night, replaced by an eerie quiet. Only the faintest wisps of powdery snow drifted lazily to the frozen earth. Rachel slid open the cabin's creaking door and emerged, blinking in the pale gray dawn. A thin film of powder coated everything as far as she could see, muting even the nearest trees into pale smudges. No trace remained of where the body had fallen hours before. John appeared beside her, scanning their surroundings warily. Any footprints from last night had been swept clean. An unsettled feeling rose in Rachel's gut at the uncanny stillness blanketing the tundra. Someone should check on the others, she said, to ease her nerves as much as John's. He nodded, lips pressed thin. They trod single file back through knee-deep drifts toward the dim glow of the shelter, where Mike still tended the survivors through the long night. Rachel paused before entering, frozen by a guttural cry from within. Inside, Mike worked frantically over a still form on the floor, knees soaked red as he pumped rhythmically on its chest. John seized a lantern and knelt, grimacing at the sightless eyes staring back from a face ashen and blue-lipped. He didn't make it, Mike reported grimly, rocking back on his heels. Bled out internally. There was nothing more I could do. A sniffle drew their attention to the boy's mother huddled in the corner, holding her son tight though his leg had been splinted. Tears froze on her lashes as she took in the dead man beside them. "Two down already," John said quietly. "We can't stay cooped up in here. It's not safe." Mike glowered, challenging. "And where do you suggest we go, teacher?" "March into that storm and freeze to death. I say we wait it out." "If something out there is attacking people, waiting is a death sentence," Rachel burst out, frustration lending steel to her tone. "We need to put distance between us and—" A low groan interrupted from the shadows behind a rack of tools. They whipped around to find the pilot stirring on a pile of musty blankets, blinking rheumy eyes at the commotion. "You're awake," John sighed in relief, helping the man sit up gingerly. "How are you feeling?" The pilot grimaced, rubbing his temples. "Like I tried to land a plane through a brick wall. Heads pounding ... What happened to the others?" Somber faces told the story as his memory returned in fragments. A strangled gasp escaped him at the dead man on the floor. "This can't be random," John insisted to Mike, keeping his voice low. "Something or someone is specifically targeting this group. We need to move everyone now before the attacker has a chance to strike again." Mike's retort died on his lips at a series of rapid clicks and scratches from outside, somewhere beyond the brittle trees. Like nails dragged across a chalkboard, the chilling sound raised the hairs on their necks. In a heartbeat, Rachel scrambled to bar the door behind them as they exited, cutting off any retreat. Her breath caught in her throat at the sight that awaited in the clearing beyond. Red droplets stained the snow in a widening trail leading back into the skeletal forest. A splash of vivid crimson smeared the outer wall of the cabin where something or someone had been violently slammed against the frozen boards. As the five stared in mute horror, a ragged arm flopped into view around the corner, fingers clawing feebly at empty air before going still. The survivors emerged slowly from the shelter, weapons clenched in numb hands. All color had drained from Mike's face at the gruesome discovery. Even he could no longer deny they were being actively hunted. John knelt by the fallen shape, pressing fingers to its neck out of instinctive hope more than expectation. No pulse met his touch beneath icy flesh. Gently, he rolled the body to reveal a once kind face now staring lifelessly at the gray sky, throat laid open to the bone. It was Fred, the maintenance worker from the village who'd offered them rides into town on weekends. His thick coat was shredded down one side, blood still steaming into the biting air. Deep gouges scoured his limbs and torso as if from massive claws. A savage beast, then, and one well adapted to these conditions, John concluded grimly. His students' mantras echoed in his mind when seconds count, police are only minutes away. You can't rely on anyone but yourself in an emergency. It's up to us to survive until help arrives, however long that may be. Stay sharp and do exactly as I say. No heroics, no splitting up for any reason. We stick together and watch each other's backs. Understood? Shaky nods met his determined gaze. He scanned the tree line, seeking any sign of movement. Nothing stirred but powdery flakes drifting from gray heavens. Let's move out in a tight group. Double time to the village while we still have daylight. We'll barricade one of the sturdier buildings and wait there for the storm to pass. They quick marched through ankle-deep drifts with the cabin shrinking behind them. John followed Fred's trail of blood, reasoning it led away from their attacker's last known position. Better to leave no confusion as to their route. An eerie silence pervaded the forest. Not even birdsong disturbed the muffled woodland. Their panting breaths billowed in gathering clouds as sweat froze on skin. Gradually, the tree line thinned ahead, revealing weathered buildings rising from a white shroud. Almost there, Keep a bestial roar split the air directly behind, cutting John off. He wheeled to see a hulking shape crashing through the undergrowth toward them faster than thought, massive paws churning snow into roiling waves. It was all teeth and rippling muscle, fur matted crimson down one flank. Amber eyes blazed with feral hunger fixed solely on the retreating group. 50 yards, then 40, it was almost upon them. John drew and fired in one fluid motion, years of practice paying off. His shot punched into meaty shoulder but barely slowed the charging beast. Another roar shook the forest as it bounded ever closer, 30 yards now. Go. Run for the buildings. I'll buy you time. John bellowed, unleashing continuous fire while retreating backward as fast as his legs could carry him. Figures whipped by in a blur, crashing through ever-strengthening snowdrifts toward salvation. He pumped another round into the monster's massive torso to no visible effect. Black claws threw plumes of powder into the air, gaining with each powerful bound. 20 yards, 10 John was out of time. He dove aside instinctively as a blur of carnage blew past. Mike had emerged from nowhere behind the beast, swinging an iron pipe with every ounce of strength left in his wasted frame. Metal rang off bone with a sickening crunch. The thing howled, spinning with preternatural speed to rake Mike across chest and belly. He went down hard, screams cut short. Enraged, it lunged to finish him, and was bowled over by another flying tackle. Rachel grabbed a fallen branch and clubbed the creature's snarling muzzle again and again as it thrashed beneath her. Finally, she scrambled clear, leaving it dazed but still snapping weakly. Hurry. Get clear before it recovers. John hauled Mike's limp form onto his shoulders with a cry of effort. Together, he and Rachel retreated at a limping run, glancing back to see that monster steadily rising once more, shaking blood and foam from its massive jaws. They burst into the village commons, hurling their fallen comrade through the first open door before diving in after. As one, they shoved with all remaining strength against rough-hewn timber until heavy bolts slammed home, barricading the predators without from its prey within. Story 2. Jake stirred from an uneasy slumber, rousing to a pounding ache behind his eyes. Splintered shards of light pierced the dense fog hanging heavy in the trees. His breath clouded white into the damp air as he rose onto unsteady elbows amid gnarled branches and debris scattered around him. A smudged dusk filtered through the looming pines, shadows curling in every direction. His legs trembled as he stood, soaked clothes clinging cold to his skin. Pain shot through his ribs at the slightest movement, but he remained conscious, so for now that had to mean survival. Halting screams echoed in the mist. Was it animals fighting somewhere out there or something worse? Instinct took over as he scanned the wreckage scattered around him through ragged gasps. A Boeing jet wing lay snapped like a toothpick. Luggage was torn open and disgorged across the needle-strewn earth. His breath hitched at a crimson stain pooled thick upon a bare tree trunk, but no sign of who it belonged to. And where was everyone else from the flight? Snippets fluttered back, turbulence cracking the hull like an egg, an oxygen mask brushing sweaty skin as the steep dive accelerated. Then blackness. Now awakening to this grim landscape cloaked in ghosts. Their figures moved beyond a tangle of burned seat cushions in the murk. Hello, his voice was barely more than a shredded rasp. No answer, just that moaning on the wind. One figure stumbled, collapsing back into the fog. Dead or injured, there was no telling. Something flashed deeper in the wreckage, catching his eye. A smartphone cracked but still aglow where it lay wedged amid twisted aluminum panels. His fingers shook as he tapped the screen, hoping for even the faintest hint of service but finding only static. At least it still had battery, a small mercy in this bleak place. A familiar tone reached his ears, tugging at memories just out of reach. Someone was calling for help in the distance, a woman's voice getting closer, more frantic with each plea. Lauren. I'm coming, just hold on, it cried, the accent familiar and painful. Jake started towards the cries, tripping over gnarled roots in his haste. Hello, he shouted, a burst of agony lancing his side. Is someone out there? We need help. Only that echoing reply answered his distress, weaving between the ancient trunks into a deranged chorus calling from every direction now. He broke into a small clearing, breath heaving in panic, eyes scanning for the source of the sounds. Nothing but fog and shadow greeted him, the cries seeming to drift further away no matter which way he turned. It couldn't be she was long gone. His mind was just playing tricks after the trauma, wasn't it? Instinct drove him onward, despite the doubt gnawing deeper with every phantom call. A glint caught his notice amid rotting leaves' wedding band, dented but still on his finger where it belonged. His fingers traced the engraving as memories of happier times flooded in, easing some of the tension coiling tight in his neck and shoulders. His wife, Emma, departed for so long now, but always with him in spirit wherever the winds of fate blew him. If only she was here in reality to soothe his aches and guide him true once more like in the past. But death had rent them apart, leaving Jake to drift ever since, wondering if joy could still be found beyond grief's shadow. Perhaps this far place held answers, or at least escape, if he could only. Snap. Something moved behind him, rustling in the brush. Whipping around, a massive shape emerged from the mist like a nightmare, fur ruffled and eyes glinting embers in the gloom. A wolf, solitary and watching him closely, its injured flank leaving a fresh trail through the rot. It growled low, not in threat but warning, before turning and padding back the way it came, tail signaling him to follow. Jake limped after the lone creature, grasping at any hope in this muffled realm between living and dead. Its sure paw prints cut clear through the fog, guiding him slowly towards cries for aid rending the quiet once more. Dim figures came into focus amid the thinning mist ahead, one kneeling by another splayed upon the forest floor. A man tended the fallen, calling orders in a stern baritone while tearing strips from his shirt to bind a profusely bleeding wound. Two more huddled nearby, one clutching his leg, the other grasping for purchase as vacant eyes stared hollowly at nothing. The wolf howled once in the distance, then faded from sight and sound, leaving them to face their shared plight together under the gathering night. The first hint of dawn crept through the mist, casting a pallid glow over the wreckage. Jake hobbled alongside Jim, the EMT's gruff voice guiding him as they searched the eerie forest for a sign of Lauren. She couldn't have gone far, Jim muttered, his eyes darting between the shadowy trunks. Not in this condition. Jake winced as a sharp pain lanced through his leg with each step. What could have driven her out there alone? The memory of Lauren's desperate cries still echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain that refused to fade. Jim shook his head, his weathered face etched with concern. Grief does strange things to the mind. We've all got our demons out here. As if to punctuate his words, a faint scream pierced the silence, sending a chill down Jake's spine. They exchanged a tense glance and hurried forward, following the sound deeper into the forest. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. David stood in the center of the clearing, his shirt torn and his eyes wild. "Stay back," he shouted, brandishing a broken branch like a weapon. "It's not safe out here." Jake scanned the area, his heart sinking as he noticed Jim's companion, the young flight attendant, was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Lauren?" he demanded, bracing himself for the worst. David's expression darkened. "That girl. She's gone. Ran off into the woods, chasing some thing, he shuddered, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the makeshift staff. Jim stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "What happened, David? What did you see?" The CEO's gaze darted around the clearing, as if he expected the forest itself to attack. I don't know. I heard her calling out, and then he shook his head, his voice trembling. It was like a shadow moving through the mist, and then she was just gone. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The forest seemed to press in around them, its eerie silence more unsettling than any sound could be. "We have to find her," he said, his voice firm despite the fear that gripped him. Jim nodded, his expression grim. "We'll split up, cover more ground that way. But stay close and keep your eyes peeled." As they set off, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening with each step. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of their footsteps seemed to echo endlessly. They searched for what felt like hours, calling out Lauren's name, but the forest remained silent, save for the occasional distant cry that sent a shiver down their spines. Eventually, they returned to the crash site, their search fruitless. David was pacing back and forth, his face drawn and haggard. "Any sign of her?" the CEO asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake shook his head, his heart sinking. "Nothing. It's like she just vanished. David's eyes narrowed, and a flicker of something dark passed across his features. That's impossible. She couldn't have just vanished. There has to be an explanation. Jim stepped forward, his expression grim. David, we all saw the same thing. Something. Took her. We need to be careful, stay together. We can't afford to lose anyone else. David's jaw tightened, and for a moment Jake thought he might lash out. But then, the CEO's shoulders slumped, and he nodded reluctantly. You're right. We need to stick together. This whatever it is, it's not going to take us without a fight. As the day wore on, the tension in the camp grew palpable. Jake could feel the weight of their shared trauma pressing in on them, the uncertainty and fear gnawing at their resolve. Jim tended to his injuries as best he could, but the pain was a constant companion, a reminder of their precarious situation. And then, as the shadows began to lengthen, David returned, his face ashen. I saw something, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Out there, in the trees. Jim straightened, his eyes narrowing. What did you see, David? The CEO's gaze darted around the camp, as if he expected the forest itself to reach out and snatch him away. It was my wife. I saw her standing there, just staring at me. But she's been dead for years. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of seeing a lost loved one, beckoning from the mist, was a terrifying one. He knew all too well the power of the mind to conjure up such phantoms, especially in the face of trauma and grief. Jim's expression darkened. David, you know that can't be real. Whatever you saw, it wasn't your wife. It's something else. Something out there. David shook his head, his eyes wild. No, you don't understand. It was her. I know it was. She was calling to me, telling me to come with her. Jake felt a pang of sympathy for the man, even as a seed of doubt began to take root in his own mind. David, we're all on edge, but we need to stick together now more than ever. Lauren's out there and we need to find her. David's gaze hardened, and for a moment Jake saw a glimmer of the ruthless CEO he had once known. No, I'm not going back out there. Not with out there. Jim opened his mouth to protest, but David cut him off, his voice shaking. I'm staying here. You two can go if you want. But I'm not risking my life for that girl. Not when I've already seen her. Jake and Jim exchanged a troubled glance, the weight of their predicament settling heavily upon them. The forest had claimed one of their own, and now it seemed to be tearing them apart from the inside. As the night closed in, the echoes of the past grew ever louder, haunting their every step. As the night deepened, Jake found himself alone at the crash site, the others having retreated into the relative safety of their makeshift camp. The forest seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing longer and more menacing with each passing minute. He huddled by the dying embers of their fire, his injured leg throbbing with each movement. Jim's condition had deteriorated rapidly, the fever and blood loss taking a heavy toll. David refused to leave the camp, his eyes wild and his voice trembling as he recounted his vision of his long-dead wife. Jake shuddered, remembering the eerie cries that had lured Lauren into the mist. What force was at work in this cursed place, toying with their minds and tearing them apart? He clutched the cracked smartphone in his hand, its dim glow the only beacon in the encroaching darkness. A sudden rustling in the undergrowth sent his heart racing. Gripping a sturdy branch, he slowly rose to his feet, his eyes scanning the shadowy trees. Hello, he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. Is someone there? The forest responded with an unsettling silence, the only sound the faint crackle of the dying embers. Jake took a tentative step forward, his breath catching in his throat as a figure materialized from the mist. It was Jim, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. Jake, he rasped, his voice barely audible. You have to get out of here. It's not safe. Jake rushed to his side, gently lowering the injured man to the ground. Jim, what happened? Where's David? Jim's brow furrowed, a look of pure terror etched on his face. David. He's gone. Taken. Just like Lauren, he coughed, a thin trickle of blood escaping his lips. I tried to stop him, but it was too strong. Jake's mind raced, the implications of Jim's words sinking in. What do you mean, too strong? What took them? Jim's eyes darted around the clearing, as if he expected the shadows themselves to reach out and snatch him away. I don't know, he whispered, his voice trembling. But it's out there, Jake. Waiting, watching. A chill ran down Jake's spine as he heard a distant, unearthly howl echo through the trees. Jim's eyes widened, and he clutched Jake's arm with surprising strength. You have to go, Jake. Get as far away from here as you can. Don't let it take you too. Jake shook his head, his own fear warring with the need to help his injured companion. I'm not leaving you, Jim. We'll get through this together. Jim's grip tightened, his eyes pleading. No, you don't understand. It's not human. It's something else, something ancient. It's toying with us, Jake. Feeding on our fears, our grief. And it won't stop until it's taken us all. Another howl, closer this time, sent a shiver down Jake's spine. He glanced around, the shadows seeming to press in from all sides. What do I do, Jim? How do I stop it? Jim's expression hardened, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. You have to face it, Jake. Confront it, on its own terms. Don't let it break you like it did the others. Jake felt a surge of fear, but he knew Jim was right. He couldn't run, not when the others were still out there, lost to the forest's cruel machinations. All right, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. What do I do? Jim's grip on his arm slackened, his strength fading. You have to find the heart of it, Jake, the source of its power. Only then can you hope to defeat it. Jake nodded, his mind racing. And how do I do that? Jim's eyes were already growing distant, his breath shallow. Follow the echoes, Jake. They'll lead you to the truth. But be careful. It's watching, waiting. It won't let you go without a fight. With those final words, Jim's eyes slid shut, his body going limp. Jake felt a surge of grief, but he knew he couldn't afford to linger. The forest was alive with unseen dangers, and he had to move quickly if he had any hope of finding the others and stopping this thing that had taken them. Steeling himself, Jake rose to his feet, the cracked smartphone clutched tightly in his hand. The faint glow cast an eerie light on the surrounding trees, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He took a deep breath and started walking, following the faint echoes that seemed to drift through the mist. The forest grew darker with each step, the shadows deepening until he could barely see the ground in front of him. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in the distance, drawing him forward. As he drew closer, he could make out a figure standing amidst the trees, its features obscured by the mist. Lauren, he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure turned, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was David, his eyes wild and his face twisted in a manic grin. Jake, he said, his voice dripping with malice. I've been waiting for you. Jake took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. David, what's happening? Where are the others? David's grin widened, and he gestured to the surrounding trees. Oh, they're all here, Jake, watching, waiting. Just like me. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, and he tightened his grip on the branch he held. David, we need to get out of here. This place, it's not right. David let out a harsh laugh. Oh, but don't you see, Jake? This is exactly where we need to be. This is where the truth lies, where the echoes of the past can finally be silenced. Jake's mind raced, trying to make sense of David's words. What are you talking about? David's expression darkened, and he took a step closer. I've seen it, Jake. I've seen the _truth_. And now I'm going to share it with you. With those words, David lunged forward, his hands outstretched, and Jake knew that he had to act quickly if he wanted to survive. Story 3. The storm raged ferociously as Caleb struggled to regain control of his small aircraft. Sheets of rainfall battered the windows, distorting his view of the inky night sky. Every gust of wind flung the little plane sideways, threatening to toss it into a deadly tailspin. Through the chaos, Caleb caught a fleeting glimpse of treetops rising up to greet him, foliage grasping at the wings like claws in the dark. He yanked back hard on the yoke with both hands, fighting a losing battle against the unforgiving elements. The rumble of trees shredding the undercarriage rattled through the cabin. With an ear-splitting screech, the plane slammed into the forest at an angle. Branches scraped long gashes across the hull as Caleb was thrown about the interior. Finally, the aircraft shuddered to a halt among the dripping trees, only the trickle of fuel and crackle of breaking underbrush disturbing the eerie stillness of the uncharted woods. Caleb blinked blearily, struggling to focus through the pounding in his skull. Warm stickiness coated the side of his face. He must have clipped his head on impact. The pain didn't register yet, only a numb buzzing in his ears. Flicking on his emergency flashlight with trembling hands, he assessed the damage. The plane lay crumpled and torn, but the cabin remained relatively intact. Caleb thanked his lucky stars, realizing he should be dead. But where was he? Peering through the tangled branches, only perpetual blackness greeted him outside, like staring into the void. Rain spilled in relentlessly through shattered panels. Caleb fumbled for the first aid kit, wrapping a bandage sloppily around his head wound. It would have to do for now. With a groan, he pried open the door against the weight of fallen vegetation. Cool night air met his skin, carrying strange scents he didn't recognize: damp moss, decaying wood, stagnant water. Stepping out unsteadily, Caleb swept the flashlight beam across his surroundings. Ancient trees towered above like gnarled sentinels keeping guard over the forest, their branches entwined overhead to block out the moon and stars. Needle-strewn earth sank underneath his boots, releasing a loamy smell. No city lights or distant road noise penetrated this wilderness, only the patter of rainfall and cries of unknown creatures in the dense undergrowth. As realization set in, a chill shot through Caleb that had nothing to do with the storm. Wherever he was, civilization lay far, leaving him completely isolated and alone in this hostile place. His luck may have saved him from the crash, but now survival skills would be put to the test. And these were no woods he had ever seen on maps. Caleb oriented himself using moss growth and located north, then began walking despite his injuries. Either he would find help or die trying in this unknowable forest under cover of night. The flashlight flickered unsteadily, as if the darkness itself resisted illumination. Stumbling over twisted roots in the poor lighting, Caleb forged onward blindly. Trees looked the same in every direction. Anxiety grew as minutes passed with no changes in scenery, only the encompassing black. Had he become turned around already? A glow up ahead through the thick trunks interrupted his fretting. At first Caleb doubted his eyes, writing it off as a hallucination from blood loss. But as he limped closer, orange light definitely flickered beyond the next copse of pines. Gripping his makeshift bandage, Caleb emerged into a small clearing bathed in the pulsing glow. There, nestled in a shallow dell surrounded by wild brambles, lay the ruins of buildings glowing with an otherworldly fire. Crumbling stone foundations hugged the remnants of walls, peppered with broken windows like eye sockets and skulls. Shingles sloughed off sagging roofs, bearing wooden ribs within. Before Caleb could process the surreal sight, movement drew his gaze. At the edge of the trees opposite, a translucent figure materialized, a man in tattered, antiquated clothing, strands of dark hair blowing in a non-existent wind. His pale eyes locked onto Caleb's with an intensity that froze his blood. "Welcome to Morrison Hollow, stranger. I am Samuel." The apparition floated closer, tendrils of mist rising from its luminous form. "You stand where my town once lived. Now, only the lost spirits and I remain on this cursed island." Caleb stood trembling on the edge of the clearing, flashlight quaking in his grip. This couldn't be real. Ghosts weren't real. Yet there floated Samuel Morrison's ghostly figure, as plain as day, misty tendrils twisting in the breeze. "You're not really here," Caleb said weakly. "I hit my head, that's all. I'm hallucinating from blood loss and trauma." Samuel sighed sadly. "Denial will not change the truth of this place, as you will soon discover for yourself. Come, let me show you what has become of my town." Against his instincts, Caleb followed the apparition into the ruins. Flickering orange hung in the air, along with wisps of Samuel, illuminating the skeletal buildings. "What is this light?" Caleb asked, eyeing it warily. "And how can I see and hear you if you're a ghost?" The veil between worlds thin on this island, allowing contact. Samuel gestured to the fire. "This is manifestation of the trapped souls who yet linger, unable to find release." Drawn to their earthly ties, they remain imprisoned. Caleb furrowed his brow, examining the strange orange flames that burned with an oily sheen but gave off no heat. Something about them seemed unnatural. Samuel led him to the largest structure, perhaps the old meeting hall, from its grand stone fireplace yawning emptily. Caleb spotted journals amid rubble and snatched up the driest-looking one, impatient to disprove the crackpot tale. By the dancing firelight, he read Samuel's faded scribblings. The ritual was a success beyond my wildest imaginings. I have breached the walls and summoned their power to do my bidding. The townsfolk believe our prosperity is God's work. Fools, if only they knew the dark pact I have made. Caleb scoffed and confronted Samuel. So your cult practiced the occult? Big deal. That doesn't prove ghosts or whatever this place is. A whispery sigh slipped from Samuel's incorporeal form. You will understand once you commune with the souls. Only they can shed light on the atrocities that curse this land. Caleb rolled his eyes, but curiosity won out. How do I? Talk to them. Aloud, and they will answer. Most slumber, but a few linger, drawn to your living energy. They wish only to warn others from sharing their fate. Heart racing, Caleb lifted his voice and yelled into the night, feeling utterly foolish. At first, nothing happened. Then shuffling sounds rose all around, glimpses of misty figures emerging from the trees and gathering at the town's edge. Caleb froze as a new voice swept through his mind. Friend, we mean you no harm. Let me show you the ritualistic demise that binds my spirit here in torment. Darkness engulfed his vision, and suddenly Caleb was somewhere else. He stood at the edge of a firelit clearing deep in the forest. 20 hooded figures chanted in an unearthly language, dancing around a massive blaze. A young woman lay bound and gagged upon an altar of stone, eyes wide with terror, as a robed man raised a curved blade. No, Caleb cried, but it was too late. The blade swung down in a slick arc amid orgasmic moans from the cultists. Scarlet spurted as the woman's empty shriek tore through the woods, the sound echoing in Caleb's mind long after her spirit finished showing its graphic final moments. He collapsed, shaking to the forest floor, retching violently. That couldn't have been real, but it had felt so vivid. Samuel's silence confirmed the ghastly truth. That twisted cult still lurked in these woods over a century later. Caleb didn't know what to think anymore. Logic and paranormal claims battled in his traumatized brain. All that could be known for certain was that on this island, dark forces were at play and danger surrounded him on all sides. He had to get off, but how without endangering others upon discovering the full scope of this crisis? Caleb spent a fitful night pacing the ruins, replaying the woman's grisly death on loop in his mind. None of this could be real. He was going mad, trapped in this condemned place. At dawn, he ventured back into the surrounding forest alone, determined to find scientific proof disproving Samuel's tales. Scouring the woods for hours turned up nothing but dripping greenery. Just as panic began to set in, Caleb heard rustling up ahead. Parting briars cautiously, he glimpsed a scene that made his blood run cold, the same clearing from his vision, charred bones scattered amid ashes within a ring of obsidian stones. His light fell upon a weathered journal half buried in the dirt. On its yellowed pages, Caleb read a damning account. The power courses through my veins. The trees murmur secrets in my passing. None know the true extent of my mastery over this place and its inhabitants. Those fools in the village think me their savior, bringing wealth and prosperity. Idiots, for I am their lord, and they will serve my purposes until the final summoning. Final ... summoning. Dread pooled in Caleb's gut as pieces fell into horrific place. Samuel had succeeded in his dark work, tearing reality asunder and binding lost souls here through unspeakable sacrifice. A smiley masked horror story had become frighteningly real. Racing back to the ruins, Caleb located Samuel by the ruins of the meeting hall. I've read enough of your journals to understand the evil you unleashed, he cried. How do I close what you opened before more perish? The apparition regarded him sadly. Alas, the door can only be shut at the final convergence when this island's mystical energy peaks anew, as it does each 100 years. That time approaches rapidly, hence my warning. You must help the trapped souls passed onto the afterlife to sever their anchor to this place. But how? Caleb gasped. I'm no occult expert. My final journal details the ritual. You must light the souls of fire with cleansing purification to release their ties to the mortal plane. Only then can the door's lock be resealed, banishing the evil forever. Flee this place before the convergence or all will be lost. With that, Samuel faded into mist, leaving Caleb alone with the weight of the island's fate on his shoulders. Rummaging the rubble, he located one final waterlogged journal and read by the ghost's restless flames. The time has come to usher in our new eternal kingdom. On the witching hour of the 100th dawn, I will complete the final summoning, and this island shall be ours to rule as gods over mortal and spirit alike. None can stop what I have wrought. Caleb scrambled for his plane's wreckage, throwing everything salvageable into a sack. By some miracle, the radio still functioned. Gripping the handset tightly, he pleaded into the mic between bouts of static. Mayday, mayday. Is anyone out there? I'm trapped on a mysterious island off the main coast with some kind of supernatural crisis. Strange rituals were performed here long ago, and now trapped souls litter the woods. A cult leader named Samuel opened a door to the afterlife, and it's closing to reseal on the next full moon. I don't know if I'm going mad or what, but I need to perform an exorcism ritual by moonrise, or this whole place will be lost to some evil force. Please, if you don't hear from me again, send help or keep others away. This island is cursed. Mayday, can anyone hear me? Only crackling responded as the ethereal lights flickered ominously in the ruins. Caleb was alone in facing the dark convergence and freeing the tortured souls if he hoped to escape alive. Combing the journals for clues, he prepared for a battle against unimaginable terror, with no guarantee of surviving the night. Whatever was unleashed in those cursed woods would have to be laid to rest forever, or doom would spread from this isolated place into the world of the living once more.